The large hall of the city's most prestigious art academy was filled with echoes of piano notes every morning. Students came and went, each chasing their dreams of becoming the next great musician or painter. The walls were lined with portraits of famous artists, each one a reminder of success and glory. But in the quiet corners, far from the spotlight, another story lived, a story no one ever noticed. Every morning, before the first class began, a cleaner would walk through those same grand doors. Her clothes were plain, her shoes old, and her face carried the quiet look of someone used to being invisible. By her side walked a little girl, barely 10 years old, holding a small lunchbox and an old storybook. She came every day, sitting in a corner of the hall while her mother worked. No one paid attention to her. She was just the cleaner's daughter. The girl didn't mind. She liked being in that big hall, listening to the music that filled the air. While her mother swept floors and wiped tables, the girl would sit cross-legged, eyes fixed on the shiny black piano at the front. She didn't have toys or gadgets, but she had music, and it fascinated her. When the piano students practiced, she listened carefully, memorizing every tune. Her small fingers would move on her lap as if she were playing invisible keys. Sometimes she would hum softly, matching the melody perfectly. Her mother noticed this many times but never said much. They lived a simple life, and dreams like those were too expensive to have. The mother only wanted her daughter to study well someday and not struggle the way she did. Every day was the same. They arrived early in the morning, cleaned the classrooms and halls before the students came in, and left after the evening shift. The girl always carried that quiet curiosity for the piano, like a secret she kept inside her heart. One morning, the sky was still gray when they reached the academy. The large doors creaked open and the hall smelled of fresh polish and wood. The mother began her usual routine, sweeping under the chairs, wiping glass doors, and dusting the corners. The girl sat on a bench near the piano, watching the reflection of the morning light on its surface. The piano looked magical to her, smooth, shiny, and full of secrets. She imagined what it must feel like to touch those keys and bring music out of them. When her mother went to clean the upper floor, she whispered, "Don't wander around, all right?" The girl nodded, smiling innocently. But as soon as her mother disappeared up the stairs, her eyes returned to the piano. It was calling her again. She looked around. No one was there. The hall was empty. Her small footsteps echoed softly as she walked closer to it. The piano stood like a sleeping giant, waiting for someone to wake it up. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. The black and white keys looked like teeth in a row, beautiful and inviting. She pressed one key gently. The sound that came out was pure, clean, and soft. It surprised her so much that she quickly pulled her hand back. Then she smiled. The sound felt alive. She pressed another key, then another, and soon her tiny fingers began to move without fear. The notes she had memorized from listening every day came back to her like old friends. The melody filled the hall quietly, almost like a whisper. It wasn't perfect, but it had feeling. Every note came from her heart. Upstairs, her mother was mopping the floor when she suddenly stopped. She heard faint music. It couldn't be possible. No one was supposed to be practicing this early. She listened carefully and then recognized the tune. It was one of the advanced pieces the senior students played. Her heart skipped a beat. She put down the mop and hurried down the stairs. When she reached the hall, she froze in the doorway. Her daughter was sitting at the piano, eyes closed, playing with both hands as if she'd been doing it for years. There was no hesitation, no fear, only pure joy. The sound that came from the piano was soft but full of life. The mother didn't move. Tears filled her eyes as she watched. The girl stopped suddenly when she saw her mother. Her face turned red and she looked down. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." Her mother walked closer, still speechless. She placed a hand on the girl's shoulder and said softly, "Where did you learn that?" The girl looked up shyly. "I just listened. I remember the sounds." Her mother knelt down beside her, her eyes wide in disbelief. "You remember the songs just by listening?" The girl nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I can hear them in my head. I just try to play them." The mother didn't know what to say. She had no money for lessons, no connections in the world of music. But seeing her daughter sitting there, her fingers resting on the piano keys, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed from the far end of the hall. One of the academy's staff members entered carrying a clipboard. He frowned when he saw them. "What's going on here?" he asked sharply. The mother quickly stood up, apologizing. "I'm so sorry." She just touched it for a moment. "It won't happen again," the man sighed. "Be careful. That piano is worth more than your year's salary. Please make sure she doesn't touch it again." He left without another word. The little girl's head dropped. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Mama." The mother looked at her for a moment, then gently lifted her chin. "Don't be sorry, my dear. That was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard." She smiled softly and added, "But for now we must be careful. The world doesn't always see talent where it should." That night when they went home, the girl couldn't stop thinking about the piano. She lay in bed replaying every note she had played earlier. Her fingers twitched as if they were still pressing the keys. Her mother sat beside the small window, staring at the city lights. Life had always been hard, but now her thoughts were different. Maybe, just maybe, her daughter could have a chance to live a life beyond cleaning halls. Days passed. Every time they went to work, the girl would find small moments to sit near the piano. She didn't always play, sometimes she just listened. She studied how the students moved their hands, how they pressed the pedals, how they turned emotion into music. She noticed details most adults missed. Some students began to notice her too. "Why does the cleaner's kid always stare at us?" one of them whispered once, another shrugged. "She probably doesn't have anything better to do." But they didn't know that she was memorizing everything they played, every note, every rhythm. One afternoon, when the hall was almost empty, a sudden rainstorm began outside. The students left in a hurry, leaving the piano uncovered again. The girl sat watching the raindrops hit the tall windows, creating a soft rhythm. Then she looked at the piano and smiled. She walked up and began to play a soft melody that matched the rain. The sound blended perfectly with the patter of drops. It was peaceful and sad at the same time. Her mother, who was mopping the floor nearby, stopped to listen again. The sound filled the empty hall like a dream, and a calm, honest and beautiful. She whispered to herself, "My daughter was born for this." Neither of them noticed that at the far end of the corridor a man had stopped to listen. He was carrying a folder and umbrella, one of the academy's event coordinators. He stood quietly, hidden behind a column, listening to the little girl play. His eyes widened. The music wasn't just good. It was full of something raw and real. When the girl finished, she giggled softly, proud of herself. The man took a deep breath and slowly stepped back before they could notice him. He walked away with a thoughtful look on his face. Something told him that this wasn't just a random moment. He had just witnessed something special, something the world needed to hear. And that small, innocent act, a girl playing the piano while her mother cleaned, was about to change their lives forever. The next morning began like every other. The mother and daughter arrived early, long before the first students. The hall was still quiet and the sunlight filtered through the tall windows, leaving soft golden lines on the floor. The girl followed her mother, humming softly. The same melody she had played the day before. She didn't know that someone had heard her. Far away in an office at the academy, the event coordinator from the previous night sat at his desk, still thinking about what he had witnessed. He had worked with countless musicians, but something about that moment, the way the little girl played, kept echoing in his mind. There had been no sheet music, no teacher standing by her side, no signs of formal training. Yet the music had heart, real, honest emotion. He couldn't shake the memory. By noon, curiosity got the better of him. He went to the main hall, hoping to see her again. He found the cleaner polishing the marble floors and greeted her politely. The little girl was sitting quietly nearby, drawing on a piece of paper. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound casual. "Your daughter, she's the one who was playing yesterday, wasn't she?" The mother froze for a moment. She didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry if that caused any trouble," she replied quickly. "She won't do it again." He shook his head. No, it was beautiful. I couldn't believe what I heard." "Does she take lessons here?" The mother's expression softened into a sad smile. "No, sir. We can't afford lessons. She just listens when others play. That's all." The man looked surprised. He glanced at the little girl who was now watching them shyly. "You learned to play just by listening?" he asked gently. She nodded, her small hands gripping the paper tightly. "Would you play something for me again?" he asked. The mother hesitated. "Sir, please. If someone sees, we could lose this job." He smiled kindly. I'll take responsibility. I just want to hear her again. The mother looked at her daughter and gave a small nod. The girl stood up slowly and walked toward the piano. Her steps were light, but her heart beat fast. She opened the lid and touched the keys with care, as if greeting an old friend. She began to play the same melody as yesterday, the one inspired by the rain. Her fingers moved softly, every note filled with emotion. The man closed his eyes as the music filled the hall again. It wasn't perfect, but there was something real in it, something pure. When she finished, the hall was silent for a moment. Then the man clapped softly. That was incredible, he said. You have a gift. The girl smiled shyly. Her mother stood behind her, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. What's your name, young lady? He asked. She looked up, her voice gentle. I'm Lily. Well, Lily, he said warmly, would you like to play in front of people someday? Maybe even on a big stage? Her eyes widened. A big stage? Like the ones I see through the glass? Yes, exactly like that, he said with a grin. Her mother looked worried. Sir, please. She's just a child. And we're not part of this world. He shook his head again. Talent like this doesn't care about where you come from. I think the director of this academy should hear her. The mother's face turned pale. The director? Oh no, that's not a good idea. Please, sir, she'll be in trouble. But the man simply smiled. Trust me. I'll speak to him myself. That afternoon he went straight to the director's office. The director was an older man with sharp eyes and a busy schedule. He had seen thousands of students and it took a lot to impress him. What is it, Hargrove? The director asked impatiently. There's something you need to hear, said the coordinator. A little girl. She's not a student, she's the cleaner's daughter. But she plays the piano like someone who's lived music all her life. The director raised an eyebrow. The cleaner's daughter? Are you serious? Yes, Hargrove said firmly. I heard her myself. It wasn't rehearsed or forced. It was natural. I think we should listen to her before tonight's gala rehearsal. Just for a minute. The director sighed, clearly skeptical. Fine, but if this is a waste of time. It won't be, the man said confidently. That evening, when most students had gone home, the cleaner and her daughter were quietly finishing their work when Hargrove returned to the hall. He smiled and said, Come with me. The director wants to hear you play. The mother's heart started racing. Sir, please. This isn't right. We're not allowed, he interrupted gently. It's all right. I've arranged it. The little girl looked up at her mother. Please, Mama, she whispered. Just once. The mother hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, but only once. When they entered the director's office, the old man sat behind his desk, his arms crossed. A few teachers stood nearby, curious. They all looked surprised to see the cleaner and her child standing there. This is the girl? One teacher whispered. Yes, Hargrove said. Just let her play. The director gestured toward the piano in the corner. Go ahead. The girl approached it carefully. Her fingers trembled as she sat down. The room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. She took a deep breath and began to play. At first the notes were soft and uncertain, but soon the sound filled the room with warmth. The melody rose and fell, full of emotion that no one could explain. She wasn't just pressing keys. She was telling a story. Every person in that room stopped moving. The director leaned forward, his expression slowly changing from boredom to surprise. The teachers exchanged looks. The melody grew stronger, deeper, as if it carried every dream she'd ever had. When she played the final note, the silence lingered for several seconds. The director finally spoke, his voice quiet. Who taught you? She looked up nervously. No one, sir. I just listened. He glanced at her mother, who stood near the door, clutching her apron. Is this true? He asked. The mother nodded, her voice trembling. Yes, sir. She's never had lessons. She just listens while I clean. The director stood up, walked around the desk, and looked at the piano again. Remarkable, he murmured. Hargrove smiled slightly. I told you. After a long pause, the director turned back to the mother and daughter. There's an important event tonight, a gathering of musicians, artists, and critics. I want her to play one piece, just one. It will be a surprise for the guests, the mother gasped. Sir, no, she can't. She's never performed before. The director smiled kindly. Sometimes the best performances come from those who play with their hearts, not with fear. The little girl's eyes were wide. You want me to play? In front of all those people? Yes, he said. Do you think you can do it? She hesitated, looking at her mother. The mother knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "If you want to, my love, then do it. Play the way you do when no one is watching." That night, the Academy prepared for the grand gala. The hall was decorated with golden lights, tall flower arrangements, and elegant banners. The best musicians and painters in the city arrived, dressed in their finest clothes. The air was full of chatter, laughter, and excitement. Behind the curtains, the little girl stood nervously, her hands shaking. She wore a simple white dress borrowed from one of the staff members. Her mother stood beside her, holding her hand tightly. "It's okay," her mother whispered. "Just close your eyes and play like you always do." She nodded slowly. Her heart pounded in her chest as she peeked through the curtain at the crowd. There were hundreds of people out there, famous artists, teachers, reporters. The director walked up to her and said softly, "You'll be introduced after the third performance. Just take a deep breath and do your best." She nodded again. When the moment finally came, the lights dimmed slightly. The director walked to the stage and said into the microphone, "Tonight we have a special performance. A young guest with no formal training, but with a gift that speaks for itself." The crowd murmured curiously as the little girl stepped onto the stage. The piano sat under the spotlight. Waiting, she took a seat, her feet barely touching the pedals. The hall was completely silent. Then, with trembling hands, she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The first few notes floated gently through the air, soft and uncertain. But then something changed. The fear faded, replaced by feeling. Her eyes closed, and her fingers danced across the piano, bringing life to the melody she had carried in her heart for years. The music grew stronger, richer, more beautiful. It filled every corner of the hall. People stopped whispering. Some leaned forward, their expressions softening. By the time the last note faded, the hall was still, silent, awestruck, almost breathless. Then suddenly, the crowd erupted into applause. It was the beginning of something no one could have predicted. The sound of applause filled the hall. It started softly, then grew louder and louder until the entire place was on its feet. The little girl sat frozen on the piano bench, her small hand still resting on the keys. The lights were bright, but she could see people clapping, standing, smiling, even cheering. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. She had never been in front of a crowd like this before. Her heart raced so fast it felt like it would jump out of her chest. Behind the curtain, her mother stood with tears streaming down her face. She had covered her mouth with both hands, trying not to cry out loud. She had never imagined that her daughter, who once sat quietly in the corner of a cleaning job, would be standing under the bright lights of the same academy stage. The director stepped forward and smiled proudly. He gestured for the girl to stand and take a bow. She did nervously, lowering her head as the applause continued. Some of the guests were whispering among themselves. "Who is she? She's not one of the academy students. I heard she's the cleaner's daughter." "You're joking." But the moment they saw her shy smile, the whispers turned into admiration. Her innocence and talent had touched something deep in them. After the performance, the guests moved into the reception area. The hall buzzed with excitement and conversation. Everyone was talking about the same thing: the little girl who played like a professional, even though she had never been trained. The mother and daughter sat quietly backstage, still processing what had just happened. The girl held her mother's hand tightly. "Mama," she whispered, "did I do okay?" Her mother hugged her. "You did more than okay, my love. You made the whole world stop to listen." Before they could leave, the director came backstage, followed by several guests, musicians, composers, and journalists. The mother stood up quickly, nervous. "Please, sir," she said, "I hope she didn't cause any trouble." The director shook his head. "Trouble? Not at all. You have no idea what just happened out there." He turned to the girl. "You were wonderful. That performance was something we'll all remember for a long time." The girl blushed and looked down, not sure how to respond. One of the famous musicians stepped forward, an older man with kind eyes. "Little one," he said softly, "you have a gift that people spend their whole lives searching for. You play not just with your hands, but with your heart." Another woman, a well-known pianist, nodded. "If you ever want proper lessons, I would be honored to teach you myself." The mother looked overwhelmed. "Lessons? But, sir, ma'am, we can't afford that." The director interrupted with a smile. "You don't have to worry about that anymore. Starting tomorrow, your daughter will be given a place at the academy, completely free of charge. The mother's mouth fell open. You mean she can study here? Yes, the director said warmly. Talent like hers deserves a chance. We'll take care of everything. For a moment, the mother couldn't speak. Her eyes filled with tears again. She took her daughter's hand and whispered, You see, my little one, dreams can come true, even for people like us. The girl looked up at the director and said in her small, sincere voice, Thank you, sir. I'll practice every day. I promise, he smiled. I know you will. That night, when they finally went home, the streets were quiet and the air was cool. The girl held onto her mother's arm, both of them walking in silence. They didn't need words. The night itself felt magical. When they reached their small apartment, the girl placed her hand over her heart. Mama, she said softly, when I was playing, I felt like the piano was talking to me, like it was telling me stories. Her mother smiled and kissed her forehead. That's what music does, my love. It speaks in ways words never can. The next morning, things began to change. When they arrived at the academy, people who used to walk past them without a glance suddenly smiled and greeted them. Good morning, one of the staff members said cheerfully. The star of last night is here. The girl hid behind her mother, shy and blushing. Some students stared with curiosity. They had heard the rumors and the cleaner's daughter who played better than anyone else. Some were amazed. Others were jealous. But most of them were simply in awe. That day, she met her new teacher, the same kind woman from the gala who had offered to train her. The teacher sat beside her at the piano and asked her to play again. The girl began slowly, her fingers moving carefully across the keys. After a few minutes, the teacher stopped her gently and said, You have something special, but you must learn how to shape it. You already play from your heart. Now we'll teach you to play with skill too. And so, her real journey began. Days turned into weeks. The mother continued her cleaning job, but now she did it with a smile. Whenever she passed by the practice rooms, she could hear her daughter playing. The sound filled the hallways with life. Even the students stopped to listen sometimes. One afternoon, the mother was mopping near the staircase when two guests passed by. Have you heard the little pianist yet? One asked. Oh yes, the other replied. They say she's going to be the Academy's youngest performer this season. The mother paused, her heart swelling with pride. The girl worked harder than anyone else. She practiced for hours after her lessons, even when her small fingers hurt. She would sometimes fall asleep on the piano bench, her head resting on her arm. Her mother would find her and carry her home gently. One evening, while the girl practiced alone, the director came into the room quietly. He stood near the door watching her play. Her face was calm, her movements full of grace and feeling. When she finished, she looked up and saw him. Oh, I didn't see you there, sir, she said quickly, standing up. He smiled. You remind me of a time when music was pure. You don't play for fame or applause, and you play because it's who you are. She didn't quite understand, but she smiled politely. He continued, The world can be harsh sometimes. People will try to shape you, control you, tell you what kind of musician to be. But promise me one thing, never lose the heart that made you start playing. She nodded firmly. I promise. The next few months passed in a blur of lessons, rehearsals, and small performances. Word about the cleaner's daughter spread beyond the academy. Local newspapers began writing short articles about her. Some called her a prodigy, others called her an inspiration. But to her mother, she was still the same little girl who once sat in a corner, humming to herself while waiting for her to finish work. Sometimes, after classes ended, the girl would still help her mother clean. She didn't see it as work. She said it made her feel calm. She liked being close to her mother, even in silence. One evening, while they were cleaning the empty hall together, the girl stopped and looked at the piano in the middle of the stage. Mama, she said softly, do you think I'll ever be good enough to play for the world? Her mother set the mop aside and sat down beside her. You already are, she said gently. The world just hasn't heard enough yet. The girl smiled. Then I'll play until they do. She walked up to the piano and began to play again. Not for an audience, not for fame, but for her mother, who had believed in her when no one else did. The music filled the empty hall once more, echoing through the walls that had once ignored her. And though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of something far greater, because soon, the world outside those academy doors would learn her name. The grand day of the luxury art event arrived sooner than anyone expected. The academy was buzzing with energy from morning till night. Staff members ran up and down the hallways, arranging flowers, setting up lights, and checking every detail twice. Famous artists from all over the country were expected to attend. It wasn't just another event. It was the most important night of the year for the academy. For most people, the evening meant glamour, fame, and opportunity. But for one small girl, it meant something entirely different. In a quiet corner of the rehearsal hall, she sat at the piano, her feet barely touching the pedals. She had been practicing the same piece again and again for days. Her fingers were sore, but she didn't stop. Every time she played a note, she remembered where she had come from. The small apartment, the long nights waiting for her mother, the sound of her broom brushing against the marble floors. Her mother stood by the door, watching quietly, holding a small bag of food she had packed for her daughter. She didn't say much, but her eyes spoke everything. Pride, worry, and hope all mixed together. Finally, the girl stopped playing and turned to her mother. "Do you think they'll like it?" she asked softly. Her mother smiled. "You don't have to worry about that. Just play the way you always do. Play from your heart. That's what makes people listen." The girl nodded. "I'll try." As the afternoon sun faded, guests began arriving. Expensive cars lined up outside the academy. Inside, chandeliers sparkled and people in elegant clothes moved from one art display to another. There was laughter, soft music, and the gentle sound of wine glasses touching. The air was filled with perfume and excitement. The director of the academy greeted everyone proudly. It was his favorite night of the year, the night when artists, critics, and celebrities gathered to celebrate talent. But this time he had something special planned. He looked toward the stage and saw the little girl standing backstage with her mother. She looked nervous, clutching the edge of her white dress, the same one she had worn at her first performance, now neatly pressed and a little short at the ankles. Her hair was tied with a simple ribbon. She didn't look like anyone else at the event, but that was what made her stand out even more. The director approached them with a kind smile. "Are you ready?" he asked. The girl nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "A little scared," she whispered. He leaned closer and said gently, "You know, the great ones always feel that way before they play. It means you care." Her mother knelt beside her, fixing a loose strand of hair. "Remember," she said softly, "close your eyes if you feel afraid. Just imagine it's only you and the piano, no one else." The girl took a deep breath and smiled faintly. "Okay, Mama." As the event began, several performances took place. A famous violinist, a young painter who finished a masterpiece live on stage, a choir that sang beautifully. Each act received polite applause, but something about the atmosphere felt formal, almost distant. People admired the performances, but their hearts weren't truly moved. Then the director stepped forward and took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice echoing through the hall, "tonight we have a special performance. A young talent whose story reminds us that music can come from anywhere, even from the quietest corners of life." People turned their heads curiously. He continued, "Please welcome someone who has touched our hearts here at the Academy, our youngest pianist." The lights dimmed slightly, and the little girl walked slowly onto the stage. Her small figure looked almost fragile against the grand piano. There was a quiet murmur in the audience. Some people whispered, wondering why a child was performing at such a prestigious event. But when she sat down and placed her fingers on the keys, the hall fell silent. For a few seconds, she didn't move. She just breathed. Then she closed her eyes, remembering her mother's words. "Just imagine it's only you and the piano." The first notes came out soft and gentle, like a whisper. The melody flowed through the air, simple yet powerful. Slowly the music began to grow, wrapping the audience in emotion. It was as if every note carried a story, of love, of struggle, of hope. Her fingers moved with grace, but it wasn't technique that caught everyone's attention. It was feeling. The sound reached deep into people's hearts, reminding them of something they had forgotten. The beauty of pure, honest expression. In the crowd, one of the country's most respected composers leaned forward. His eyes narrowed, not in judgment, but in awe. He whispered to the person beside him, "Do you hear that?" She's playing with emotion, not perfection. That's what real music sounds like. Another artist, a painter known for his fiery temper, found himself quietly wiping his eyes. That child, he said softly, paints with sound. Even the waiters had stopped moving. The entire hall was still. No clinking glasses, no murmurs, just the sound of a little girl playing her heart out. Her mother stood backstage, unable to move. Her hands were clasped tightly together. Every time her daughter played a soft passage, she held her breath. And when the melody rose, she felt her chest swell with pride. The piece ended with a single lingering note that hung in the air before fading away. Silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then suddenly applause erupted like thunder. People stood up from their seats, clapping, cheering, some even whistling. The girl opened her eyes in surprise. She had never heard a sound like that, hundreds of people clapping for her. She stood slowly and bowed, shyly smiling. Her eyes searched for her mother, and when she saw her behind the curtain, their eyes met. The mother raised her hands and clapped too, tears streaming down her face. The director returned to the stage, smiling proudly. He took the microphone again and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, that was the performance of a young girl who only months ago sat in the back of this very hall, waiting for her mother to finish work. Tonight she reminded us that greatness doesn't always come from privilege. Sometimes it comes from passion." The applause grew even louder. Famous artists began lining up after the show to meet her. Some wanted to shake her hand. Others wanted to talk to her mother. The composer who had been watching closely came forward and said, "I would like to mentor her. She has something rare, something you can't teach." The mother could barely speak. She looked at the man with tears in her eyes and simply nodded. The painter who had been emotional during the performance gave the girl a small box. Inside was a golden music note pendant. "For luck," he said softly. "Keep it close to your heart." Everywhere she turned, people were praising her. Photographers took pictures. Journalists asked questions. But through it all, she remained humble, standing close to her mother, holding her hand whenever she could. Late that night, when the event ended and the guests had gone home, the mother and daughter stood alone in the empty hall. The lights were dim now, and the piano sat quietly under the soft glow of the chandeliers. The girl looked at it and smiled. "Mama," she whispered, "it feels like a dream." Her mother wrapped her arm around her shoulders. "It's real, my love. You made it real." They stood there in silence for a while. The same hall that once ignored them now felt like home. Before leaving, the girl walked up to the piano one last time. She placed her hand gently on the keys and whispered, "Thank you." Her mother watched with a soft smile, knowing that something had changed forever. That night, as they walked home through the quiet streets, the stars shone brighter than ever. The mother looked down at her daughter, who was still clutching the pendant given to her by the painter. "You know," her mother said softly, "all those famous people, they saw you tonight. But more importantly, they felt you. That's something money or fame can never buy." The girl nodded sleepily. "I just wanted to make you proud." The mother squeezed her hand. "You already have." The world would soon talk about her, the cleaner's daughter who played the piano and silenced a hall full of critics. But for that night, it was just the two of them, walking together, hearts full, knowing that their lives had changed. Not because of luck, but because of courage, love, and the simple magic of believing. The next morning, sunlight poured into their small apartment through the thin curtains. The smell of tea filled the room, and the mother quietly prepared breakfast. On the little table sat a pile of newspapers. She hadn't noticed them yet. She was too busy making sure her daughter had enough to eat before heading to school. But when the girl came out of her room, still in her wrinkled school uniform, she froze. Her eyes landed on the front page of one of the papers. She slowly picked it up, and her mouth fell open. There, in full color, was a photo of her sitting at the piano from last night, her fingers on the keys, her face calm and focused. The headline read, "The Cleaner's Daughter Who Stole the Show." She gasped softly, "Mama, look!" Her mother turned, wiping her hands on her apron. She walked closer and squinted at the picture. For a few seconds, she didn't say anything. Then she covered her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes. "Oh my goodness. That's you," she whispered. "You're on the front page," the girl laughed in disbelief. "I can't believe it." "They called me The cleaner's daughter. Her mother's voice trembled. That's what you are. And you showed them that even a cleaner's daughter can shine brighter than anyone else. By noon, the phone at the academy hadn't stopped ringing. People were calling from every corner of the city. Talent scouts, journalists, and even well-known musicians wanted to know who the little girl was. Some wanted interviews. Others wanted to offer scholarships or performances. The director couldn't hide his excitement. She's become a sensation overnight, he told one of the staff. Everyone wants to meet her. That afternoon, he called the mother and daughter to his office. When they arrived, he was already on a video call with someone important, a man who owned one of the biggest concert halls in the country. The man smiled through the screen. So this is the young lady everyone's talking about, he said warmly. I'd like to invite her to perform at our winter gala next month. It's a charity event, the biggest of the year. Will she accept? The girl looked at her mother, eyes wide. The mother hesitated. She's still so young, she said softly. She has school and... The director interrupted gently. I understand your concern, but this could change her life. She'll have full support, and we'll make sure her studies don't suffer. The girl's heart was pounding. She looked at her mother again. Please, Mama, she whispered. Just one more performance. I'll still do all my homework. Her mother sighed. She wanted to protect her daughter, but she also knew that this moment was special. Something rare. After a long pause, she smiled faintly. All right, but promise me you'll stay humble. The girl nodded quickly. I promise. Word spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within days, her name appeared in magazines and TV interviews. People called her the miracle pianist. Clips of her performance at the art event went viral online. The video showed the moment she began to play, the crowd falling silent and the thunderous applause at the end. Even those who didn't know much about music were moved by her story. She wasn't rich. She didn't come from a family of musicians. She was just a cleaner's daughter who loved the piano, and somehow that made her even more inspiring. Famous artists began visiting the academy just to meet her. One morning, a tall woman wearing sunglasses arrived. She was a celebrated opera singer known around the world. She walked straight up to the little girl, knelt down, and said, You remind me why I started singing. Never stop playing the way you do. The girl was speechless. She just smiled shyly and said, Thank you. Another day, a film composer sent a handwritten note. It said, When you play, I can see the stories I've been trying to tell through my music. Don't lose that gift. The mother couldn't believe how many people came to see her daughter. Every evening when they walked home, someone would recognize her and stop to say how much her performance had touched them. But fame, even when it comes from something beautiful, can be overwhelming. The girl began feeling the pressure of everyone's expectations. She practiced longer hours, sometimes forgetting to eat. She wanted to make sure her next performance was even better than the first. One evening, her mother found her still sitting at the piano, her eyes tired, her hands trembling slightly. Enough for today, her mother said gently. You need rest. The girl shook her head. What if I make a mistake next time? What if they don't like me anymore? Her mother walked over, placed her hands on her daughter's shoulders, and said softly, Listen to me. You didn't win their hearts because you were perfect. You did it because you played with love. Never forget that. The girl looked up at her mother and slowly nodded. Okay, Mama. As the winter gala approached, the excitement grew. The event was going to be held in one of the most prestigious halls in the city, a place where world-famous musicians had performed. The director arranged everything, and once again, the girl's name appeared on posters and invitations. When the big night arrived, the hall was filled with hundreds of guests, actors, singers, composers, journalists, and philanthropists. Even the country's cultural minister was present. Backstage, the girl sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing a simple white dress again, though this one was new, a gift from a fashion designer who had been touched by her story. Her mother stood beside her, holding her small music notebook. Are you ready? Her mother asked softly. The girl smiled faintly. I think so. When her name was announced, the applause began before she even stepped on stage. Everyone had heard about her, the little pianist who came from nothing and moved an entire hall of people to tears. She walked out calmly, though her heart was racing. The grand piano sat under a single spotlight. She sat down, took a deep breath, and let her fingers rest on the keys. She began to play a piece she had written herself. It wasn't perfect or complicated. It was simple, full of emotion, with melodies that felt like memories. Each note carried something personal: her childhood, her mother's sacrifices, the quiet nights of practice, the dreams she'd never dared to speak aloud. The audience was captivated. Some closed their eyes. Others leaned forward, not wanting to miss a single note. Midway through the piece, she looked up and saw her mother standing in the shadows of the side curtain, smiling through tears. That gave her all the strength she needed. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause once again, louder than before. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Some even shouted her name. Reporters rushed to the front to take photos. One of the country's most famous pianists came on stage, shook her hand, and said, "You have something I can't teach, a soul that speaks through music." Her mother joined her on stage as the crowd continued to cheer. Someone handed her a bouquet of white roses. Cameras flashed, lights shone, but in that moment none of it mattered. She looked up at her mother and whispered, "Did I do well?" Her mother bent down and kissed her forehead. "You did more than well. You made the world listen." After the show, there was a long line of people waiting to meet her: famous artists, music teachers, and children who wanted to learn piano because of her. Some brought gifts, others brought letters. One elderly man in a worn suit approached her quietly. He said he had been a janitor at the academy years ago. He smiled and said, "When I see you, I remember why I loved that place. You made all of us proud." The girl smiled warmly and thanked him. As the night ended, she sat in the empty hall again, just like before. The applause had faded, and only the faint sound of her mother's footsteps echoed behind her. She turned and said softly, "Mama, do you think this is the start of something big?" Her mother smiled, sitting beside her. "Maybe. But no matter how far you go, never forget where you started. The music that touched their hearts came from your truth and from love." The girl leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I'll never forget." That night they walked home under the same quiet sky. The lights of the city shimmered around them, and though the world now knew her name, she remained the same, humble, grateful, and full of dreams. Little did they know the story was far from over. What would come next would test not only her talent but her heart, and would prove that true greatness isn't measured by fame, but by how deeply one can touch the lives of others. Months passed after the winter gala, but people still talked about that little girl who had changed the meaning of music for so many. Her photo hung on the walls of the academy now, not as a decoration but as a reminder that talent could bloom anywhere, even in the quietest corners of life. The offers didn't stop coming. Big music schools wanted to take her in. Famous producers wanted her to play for their projects. Invitations came from cities she had never even heard of. But through it all, she stayed the same, humble, soft-spoken, and full of gratitude. Every morning, she still walked to school with her mother, holding her hand. They still shared tea in their small kitchen, and the same piano in the academy hall remained her favorite place in the world. She never asked for anything fancy. All she wanted was more time to play. But as her name grew, the world around her began to change in ways she didn't expect. The academy, once a quiet place of practice and learning, started attracting crowds. People came not just to see the building. They came hoping to catch a glimpse of the girl who had stolen the hearts of artists and critics alike. Some would peek into the hall, whispering excitedly, wondering if she was there. At first, it made her nervous. She didn't like the attention. She just wanted to play like before, when it was only her, the piano, and her mother sitting quietly nearby. One day, after finishing her practice, she sat on the piano bench, staring at the keys. Her mother came up behind her and said softly, "You seem quiet today." The girl sighed. "Mama, I feel like people don't listen to the music anymore. They just want to see me. They clap before I even start playing. It feels different now." Her mother sat beside her and smiled gently. "That's because they already love you. But you're right. Fame can change how people see things. That's why you must keep your heart the same. Play for yourself. Play for what's real." The girl nodded slowly, letting those words sink in. In the weeks that followed, she decided to do something small but special. Without telling anyone, she began visiting the city's community center, a quiet place where children from poor families came to learn. They didn't have fancy instruments or expensive lessons. Some had never touched a piano before. She would go there once a week after school. The old piano in the corner was out of tune, but that didn't matter to her. She taught the kids simple melodies, helping them find joy in the sound of music. At first, the children were shy, but soon the room would fill with laughter and notes that, though imperfect, were full of heart. Her mother would wait by the door, smiling proudly as she watched her daughter teach with patience and kindness. One afternoon, while she was helping a little boy play a few keys, a man quietly entered the room. He wore a long coat and carried a camera. He had been sent by a local newspaper that had heard about her visits. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. He saw the little girl bending down to help the boy, her voice soft and encouraging, her smile warm. He took a few pictures and left silently. A few days later, another article appeared in the papers. The headline read, "The young pianist who hasn't forgotten where she came from." People were amazed. In a world where fame often changed people, this girl was doing the opposite, using her gift to lift others. Soon, the Academy offered to sponsor free music lessons for underprivileged children. They named the new program after her. At the opening ceremony, the director spoke to a crowd of parents and children. "She reminded us what true art means," he said proudly. "It's not about who applauds the loudest, it's about who listens with their heart." When it was her turn to speak, she walked up to the microphone nervously. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was steady. "Music gave me a voice when I didn't have one," she said softly. "It taught me that dreams don't belong to the rich. They belong to anyone who believes." The audience stood up, applauding once again, but this time it wasn't just for her performance. It was for her spirit. Her life began to change even more. She was invited to play in different countries. Each concert hall she entered was filled to the brim, and every time she finished a piece, people stood and clapped, some even crying. But no matter how far she traveled, she always came back home to her mother, and that same small kitchen where everything had started. Sometimes she would bring souvenirs, a snow globe from one city, a silk scarf from another, and place them carefully on the shelf. "For you, Mama," she would say with a smile, and her mother would always answer the same way. "You're my best gift already." Years passed. The little girl grew into a young woman. Her face became familiar across the world, yet her heart remained gentle and kind. She used her fame to support schools and young musicians who couldn't afford lessons. One evening, after a long tour, she returned to the academy where it all began. The director, now older, greeted her warmly. "You've gone so far," he said proudly. "But do you know what I admire most? You never lost yourself." She smiled and said softly, "That's because I never stopped being the cleaner's daughter." He chuckled, "And that's what makes you unforgettable." That night, she walked into the same grand hall where she had once performed as a child. The lights were dim, and the piano sat quietly under the stage lamp. Dust danced in the air. She ran her fingers over the piano lid, remembering everything. The nervousness, the applause, her mother's proud smile. She sat down and began to play, not for an audience this time, but for herself. The melody flowed gently, full of emotion and memory. Each note carried the weight of her journey, the struggles, the joy, the love that had guided her every step of the way. As she played, she could almost hear her mother's voice behind her saying, "Play from your heart. That's what makes people listen." When the last note faded, she sat in silence, smiling through tears. The next morning, she visited her old neighborhood. The streets looked smaller than she remembered, but the air still smelled of morning bread and distant laughter. She walked to the same building where she and her mother had once lived. The small apartment door now had a different family inside. She smiled at the sound of a child's laughter from within and whispered, "May your dreams be big." She then went to the community center once more. The same piano was still there, old, scratched, but still alive with music. The children were waiting for her. She sat among them and began teaching again, laughing and clapping as they hit the wrong notes and tried again. That day, a little girl from the group looked up at her and asked, "Do you think someone like me can become a pianist too?" She smiled warmly and placed her hand on the child's shoulder. "Of course," she said softly. "I was just like you once. All you need is love for music and the courage to never stop trying." The child grinned and went back to playing. As the sun set outside, The room filled with the sound of music, and uneven, imperfect, but full of heart. The young woman sat back, listening with a smile. She realized that this, not the fame, not the applause, was what truly mattered. The joy of passing on the gift, the chance to light a spark in someone else's heart, just as someone had once lit it in hers. That night, as she walked home, the stars glowed softly above. She looked up and whispered a quiet thank you, for her mother, for the piano, and for the journey that had turned her into the person she was. She knew that her story would be told for years to come. Not just because she became a famous pianist, but because she proved something simple and timeless, that greatness can rise from the humblest of places, and that love, faith, and kindness can turn even the smallest dream into something the whole world remembers. And somewhere in the echo of the night breeze, it almost felt like the piano was still playing her song, the song of a cleaner's daughter who never stopped believing.